Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. So thank you for coming out to talk this morning a little about getting a little bit of situational awareness on your network and figuring out what's going on security-wise. My name is Kevin Haynes. I'm on the SLED SE team of the Pacific Northwest, but the local team is here in force. Cindy and Sean are in the back there. Jason's over in the corner, and Tom's walking around. So if you have any follow-up questions regarding the Splunk, they're there on your behalf. During today's talk, what I want to talk about is ways to use analytics to gain some situational awareness around what's going on in your networks. When we talk about situational awareness, we're talking about the who's, what's, where's, and when's of what's going on in your network. And not only are we interested in what's going on now, we might be interested in something that happened in the past, something that, an event that comes up later that we become made aware of later. We also may want to be able to predict something about the future given what's happened in the past. So just a quick show of hands. Do any of you think that you have sort of a complete picture of what's going on your network, in your place of business? That's usually the scary answer that I get. So the problem with that is that without knowing where and what and how and who is going on in your network, you don't know if you're looking in the right places. You don't know if the things that you're looking at are important to securing your environment. So there's a variety of different sort of frameworks that help you sort of step along the maturity model and sort of learn to get better at developing that situational awareness. You know, the first sort of the Department of Homeland Security sort of has this framework, you know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 sort of approach, where, you know, the first sort of phase is, you know, just get familiar with what's on your network. What are the different devices and what are their capabilities? The next phase is around who's using that network and what are they doing with it. And then, you know, as you mature, then you start getting better at this sort of administration of all that and the orchestration of your users and your network to sort of improve your security. NIST has a whole framework around you know, securing your environment, and at the same time, lots of folks who even use NIST have no way to really understand at a glance how far along that path of security they are in having that situational awareness to allow them to see what they need to see to understand what posture they're in. So data analytical tools can help, and Splunk is one of these tools that I'm going to show you some examples, some takeaway examples of real-world sort of use of a data analytical tool like Splunk to do this sort of stuff. So where and what is this data? This is probably an easy question for most of you folks to answer. These are your normal things, you know, the things that do the work in your organization. Different organizations, things are more important to some organizations than others. Some may have databases full of PII that needs to be secured. Other folks, you know, it's all about the interaction at the web layer. Maybe if you're doing processing financial transactions, that sort of stuff. But regardless, there's a whole swath of data that's out there that can give you useful information around what's going on. Now, traditionally, there's been products that sort of, if we watch the choke points, we can make sure that everything that gets onto our network is secure, and everything that wants to get out has to go through a choke point. And we assume that everything behind the fence is golden. As we know today, that's not the best, but obviously it's a particular way of doing things that has some value. But typically, those are based on looking for signatures of patterns of activity that are known to be bad. The other way of thinking about it is sort of like the Department of Homeland phased approach is, well, maybe if we start learning a little bit more around what's going on with our users on the network. How are they using the network? So this is more of an analytics approach around understanding the behaviors of your users, looking for and determining, maybe using a little machine learning, what is norm for these users, what's norm in my environment, what does daily business look like? And from that, I can determine when something looks like an anomaly. And anomalies may be security related. Anomalies may be a part of a threat kill chain sort of aspect of what's going on. It takes a lot more information to sort of gather and glean this user-centric approach to data security, but it's certainly a viable way of doing things. Typically, we're not just now talking about choke points, we're talking about all sorts of things. How are folks, who's logging into the databases? What are they doing on there? So there's a whole application. So whatever the case may be, whatever your sort of organization's normal course of business is, those are going to be along with your firewalls and your choke points are also going to be things that feed into the mix of figuring out what's going on. So no one raised their hand when I asked if they know what's going on in the network. And why is that? Why is that the case? For lots of folks, it's a multitude of reasons. But the three main ones are, usually it's not your main mission in what your organization does to be secure. You have customers that are demanding some services from you, and that's sort of your main course of business. To maintain a happy customer, you want to not have an unsecure environment that allows maybe personal information or whatever to be taken from you. But it's not your main mission. Tools are usually used to do security, but tools are actually only one of the three pillars for doing security. And you can argue that's not even the most important. There's three pillars: people, process, and tools. People cost money to employ them. And putting processes in place and having folks follow that, having enough people to follow those processes takes money. It takes time away from your main mission. Depending on the organization, we lots of times sort of break up things into operational silos. You may have a security group that does its own thing. You may have security folks distributed through your organization. It may be just hard to do security, maybe in one place, or it's harder to buy a tool because who owns the tool? So there's organizational constraints too that come into play to sort of thwart what we're trying to do in putting together an analytical look at security. The good news is that doing an attack on a network or a potential victim is not just a one-shot thing. It's not easy to do. There are tools that help, but there are multiple steps involved in doing it. So this is a sort of an example of the sort of things that go on with an attack. And there's multiple steps, which means there's multiple things you can watch for. And as you can see there on the left, there's a sort of a stack of the different sort of technologies that help you look at these sort of parts of this attack. So, for instance, you're having some folks touch your network, start transacting with your network. What they might want to do in this example is send out a loaded mail that has some malware on it, so a PDF that's loaded with malware. That is taken onto your local network by some innocent user, hypothetically. They open it, something happens, you've got processes now running, unpacking some malware, and you now have a piece of malware on your network. So you've gone through multiple steps, multiple places where you can detect this sort of activity. This malware now does stuff. It has to, if it's going to do anything useful, it has to talk to the outside world. It has to go through a web proxy or something, and it has to reach out across the internet to affect some damage. And this is all great stuff from a security perspective, because it's all stuff that we can watch for. So here's a plug for Splunk. Splunk allows you to have a definitive record of what's going on in your network. All the machine-to-machine communication, all your human-to-machine interaction. And it's a platform on which you can collect and analyze and do all sorts of different use cases. We're talking about security today. There's all sorts of stuff you could do, all the way up to business analytics and how we're making money and what does it cost to when our site's down for this much, and we can do capacity planning. We're talking about security today, but it can do a whole bunch of cool things. The last slide is particular to Splunk. This slide's just showing, bring your data into Splunk. We offer it as a platform. You can either have it on-prem, or you can do Splunk up in the cloud if you don't want to own the infrastructure. Once the data's on the platform, you can start asking questions of your data, be it security questions, be it operational IT questions, be it business analytics. Once you start understanding your environment, you can start monitoring for that stuff that's interesting to you. You can alert on conditions that you don't like and be told about them immediately and not find out about them down the road. You can generate reports and analyses and dashboards, put them up on the wall so you can watch this stuff. Really what we're getting at here is the ability to take the information that's in your network and do some analysis on it and figure out where you have risky behavior happening. Understand the context of how things interoperate and why something that may look by itself not look dangerous, but why with some additional context, what other folks are using maybe from creating threat lists and using those threat lists to correlate that stuff with what's going on in your network. So we're going to sort of switch gears here. We're going to talk about some examples of what we can do. So what a lot of malware likes to do is it likes to get on your network, be quiet, and move across your network and infect multiple places, so that if the AV software or the machine is a laptop and it happens to be turned off for the weekend. So what you want to do is you want to land and spread. And what we can watch for is this spreading activity. So, for example, you have a network host on your network, and typically, on a daily basis, it talks to about 10 different hosts. That's just sort of normal. You have some malware that lands on it, and all of a sudden, you have this host who's usually pretty quiet about who he talks to. He has a few friends, not a lot of friends. Now he's talking to thousands of different machines. This is suspicious. Every day for the last 365 days, he's talked to about 10 different hosts. Now he wants to talk to 10,000. So now I'm going to show you what looks like sort of pseudocode. This is actually Splunk SPL, the search processing language. This is sort of the guts, the Google-like interface to Splunk your data. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing a search. I'm doing a query. I want to know, for example, show me all my Palo Alto network traffic, all my firewall traffic, maybe on an internal or a switch or whatever the case may be. And with that traffic, what I want to do is collect some statistics. I want to get an overall count of the number of transmissions that happen. I want to know the distinct count, the unique destinations that each thing talks to. I want a little graph, we'll call a spark line, for how many of those things I see during the day. And I want to do this for all my source IPs. So for every source IP, I want to know how many times they talk to other folks and how many unique folks they talk to. So this generates a big table. And so in this table, you're easily going to see and pick out maybe a particular line where you've got a consistently large guy. So you can see the little spark line, maybe that machine was rebooted last night. And so for a while, he wasn't talking to anyone. But in general, he's up, he's talking to a number of hosts, maybe he gets rebooted, but he goes back to talking to a number of hosts. And that looks sort of normal. An inconsistent sort of view might be where the scenario I laid out. You've got a guy that's talking to 10, or in this case, maybe he was 10, and all of a sudden, for no reason, totally anomalous to the last 365 days or 30 days, whatever the case may be, it ramps up to 210. He's only ever talked to 20 different hosts. All of a sudden, he's talking to 210. So let's refine our search so that we're not going through this by eye to figure out what's going on. Let's have Splunk do the work for us. So a little bit bigger search, but it's the same sort of idea. So if we're looking at our Palo Alto network traffic, and let's break up the data by day. Let's count the distinct hosts, call that numdests by source IP. So all the different IPs, all the sources, I want to know a count of how many things they talk to that's unique. I want to do this by time. I also want to know, what's the average over time for that host? What's the standard deviation? And what's the latest number? What is it right now? And I also want to take all that information, I want to filter it. I want to know where the latest number is 2 times the current standard, above the standard, 2 standard deviations above the average. So don't show me anything else, only show me where that condition is true. And so now you're down to like a little table like this. So for instance, this top one, on average, talks to about 46 different hosts. Standard deviation is pretty big, so but it's not big enough to account for the 230 it's talking to now. So it's more than 2 standard deviations. The number of hosts it's talking to right now is more than 2 standard deviations around what it typically does. So now you're working with not a table of all the IPs in your organization. You're looking at a table with 4 rows. These might be interesting folks to go look at. What's going on? Why is this now anomalous? Why is this anomalous behavior happening? This might be an example of lateral movement. If you're following along at home, there's one thing that you might do to improve this, because the average that we're calculating is now going to be taking into effect the ramp that we're now seeing. So the average is going to creep up with the amount that's going on. So what you really want to do is you don't want to include sort of the last 24 hours in your average. Just so for the nerds in the audience, we want to filter out essentially in our average. We don't want to include the last 24 hours. So what was a standard deviation just above 2, now if you filter out the last 24 hours, looks like a standard deviation of 28, which really stands out. Now we're going to pedal in a different direction, different use case here. DNS exfiltration. So the idea here being that we've got some malware on our network, and it wants to get the information out, and it wants to do it quietly. It doesn't want you to know that data is going out. Typically, what I want to do if I want to get out, I'm either going to go out through the web, through port 80 or HTTPS, or I'm blocked by the firewall, unless there's some special ports that they block down. But what I can do is use DNS. DNS is typically open because you need to be able to surf the internet. We all do it. And to do that, you need to resolve addresses to do that. And the systems that have the definitive record for, let's take Amazon. You go to hostabc.amazon.com. The way I have to figure out what that IP address is I have to go ask Amazon, what's the address for host ABC? But what if it's not Amazon? What if it's hackers.com? And hackers.com wants to know about what's host ABC. So I have to go ask hackers.com. I'm not communicating with hackers.com. And I'm potentially giving it information. So let's talk about the information I can give hackers.com just by asking it about host names. So I'm malware, and maybe I have a keylogger. Maybe I have some sort of way to collect passwords. There's a variety of different ways I can look at the host file. Whatever the case is, I can watch for it on the network. Lots of older stuff has passwords in the clear, nasty stuff. Whatever the case may be, I collect this information as a piece of malware, and I want to get it out. So I make these little strings that have that information I want. So here, Dave, and his password is 12345. I encode this using some 64-bit encoding, something that looks innocuous, but it's an encoding of that information. It's the same information, just encoded as a string. And then, what about, I just look up that host. So I look for that thing .attack.com. So guess what? DNS lookup for that string .attack.com, that goes to attack.com's DNS server to ask, how do I find that host? So while I'm looking up, I'm not really going to look up because I'm attack.com. I'll provide something back so that the user doesn't suspect anything. But I record that piece of, that blob of text. And guess what? That blob of text I can just reverse into Dave's name and password. So I've now just exfiltrated Dave's login and password by doing a simple DNS lookup. Guess what? This is fully operational. There's software that already does this, easily added to malware. So this is point and click for attackers. So if they can land some software on your network, they can exfiltrate whatever they want via DNS, which is wide open. Because it has to be wide open, otherwise you couldn't talk to the internet. You couldn't web surf. And there's not very many places that tie that down. It's really hard to see this stuff. DNS is really chatty. All of your hosts are talking to the internet all the time. There's an ocean of DNS data. All sorts of screwy looking host names, and how do you even start wrapping your hand around this? Well, you start using analytics. For our case, what we're going to do is we're going to use a toolbox that you can freely download on top of Splunk, which basically just allows us to parse URLs. We're talking about URLs here. URLs have the domain name. If the subdomain is like the Amazon.com, and the subdomain is the host or the front and part of the Amazon.com. And so it allows us to just parse these URLs, break them apart. What it also allows us to do is do things like compute Shannon scores. And what Shannon is basically just a calculation, just like the amount of randomness in a string. So you've got examples here on the screen. Just things that don't look very random have lower scores. Things that look completely random have higher scores. So we can use that information in our analytics. We're going to use the Shannon score calculation. So let's get into it now. So this is we're going to start looking at some pseudocode here. Now we're looking at our row data, our DNS information. And we use some command to parse out each of the queries that come along. We compute a Shannon score on the subdomain, which is the part in front of the Amazon.com. We get the length of that thing. Is it long, short? And we pump this out to a table. So here's an example of this Splunk interface. We've just run that query over all time, and we're looking at a big table, big nasty table. And we've got the subdomain, the domain we're talking to, the subdomain part of it. What's the Shannon score? What's the length? So we've got this, now we've got all this information. So now let's do some analysis to actually show us just the stuff that we're worried about, what we want to know about. So we just sort of add on to this. So we've got our previous search, dot, 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 that's what that dot, dot, dot is. We're gonna do some additional stuff. Now we're gonna pipe it to a stats command. We're gonna get, how many times is this happening? What's the average? You get the point here. What's the standard deviation? How much does this vary for each domain? So for each domain, let's find out what their subdomains are doing. So that's that part in front of the Amazon.com or hack or attack.com. So what you want to get out of this slide is the last sort of segment there. Only show me, now I want to search where the average Shannon score is high, above 3 in this case, where the length has enough information to do that 64-bit encoding. So I have a sort of minimum length I'm worried about. And where the actual standard deviation is low. So it's a 64-bit encoding always sort of puts out the same sort of size output. So now we're down to a simple table. We're down to about 3 or 4 rows again. These are things you want to go look at. So here, there's 2 domains where there's a whole, you get the count for how many times you're talking to it. So chicken killer and moo. Shannon scores are high. The lengths are about 40 characters. Looks like it's 64-bit encoding. Standard deviation really low. They're almost always the same length. Actually, chicken killer, they're exactly the same length. The standard deviation is 0. And look at those. Now they're looking at, you can see they're looking up big blob of data .chickenkiller.com. That's data exfiltration. So simple search, you're now detecting what we couldn't detect before in our data. Real quick, I'm going to talk about SSL abuse. Yeah.
So something else that I do along those lines that we do is look for long string DNS lookups. So just any lookups that are greater than 30 characters, just to be able to see if someone is trying to DNS channel.
Yep.
And that's what they're doing. They're trying to open up a pipe. And they can search the internet through a web browser,
Yep.
through DNS. Another thing we do is we block all port 53 lookups from clients themselves so that you're centralizing those services through your DNS service that you're providing. And you might have some additional security there. So you don't want to let clients directly connect.
But at the end of the day, they need to have that DNS resolved.
Yeah, you just want to centralize it through a point that you can control it.
No, that's a technical control you can put on it.
And
You'd have to have some intelligence there to say block that sort of stuff, and not make your customers unhappy, because now for some reason what you've done is block more than you meant to. But yep, totally. Now we're going to switch gears again, talk real quickly about SSL abuse. So this is a different way to do this, so we're not going to be doing any sort of searches here, but what we're going to do here is just an example here of what you want to be able to do data analytic-wise in your network to look for some. So this is a particular case where you don't want users using any sort of particular certificates on your network. So there is what did happen is there was a certificate on Dell machines where they actually installed it as a trusted root certificate, and lo and behold, they actually left the private key on those machines. What this allowed attackers to do is use that certificate. It's trusted on all those Dell machines, and so they could now snoop that traffic by using that certificate, since they could decode all the traffic. So you really want to know if the certificate's in use on your network. So this is an example, not using search stuff, but just analytics on a platform where you want to be able to pull metadata, monitor metadata on your network. Splunk allows you to do this with the use of what's called stream for Splunk. So any sort of SSL transaction, regardless of being able to decode the payload or not, there is metadata that goes along during the handshake for SSL that you can tease out. You can, before the payloads start being encrypted in that sort of handshake sequence, you can pull out things like the certificate issuer, and the MD5 of who issued it, the common names, things that are interesting, because we don't want specific certificates being used on our network. So if you have the capability to search for the use of these certificates on your network, thumbs up, that's a good thing. So using a tool that can easily do this for you gives you a lot of advantages. Our last section, threat intelligence. So don't try to do this all yourself. Use the community to help you here. So threat intelligence is a collection of usable, actionable intelligence around what's going on around the world, and you can apply it to your own environment. Obviously, you have to have a tool to allow you to do this. Threat intelligence is not something that just magically does work for you. So, your typical security intelligence feedback loop. This is the stuff that's happened since, probably day 2 of the internet. Attackers bypass some defense, some known weakness or vulnerability in some software. The good guys discover that. You build some indicators capturing that information. You hand it out, virus signatures, whatever the case may be. In this case, threat intelligence. So we can start now blocking on those known bads. So really, on that far left there, you just threat intelligence from the world, bring it inside. But we're not talking about just like virus signatures. What we're actually talking about are threat intelligence feeds. Threat intelligence feeds use something called STIX, basically a complicated XML blob to describe a threat. And then obviously you have to have tools that can decode this stuff, which looks like this, for instance. This is a threat feed. Pretty hard for folks to do this by hand, pull this stuff apart so that they can start adding firewall rules or whatever the case may be. What you really want is the ability to do this in an automated fashion. Pull down STIX feeds, and do that threat intelligence. You want to be able to pull these down from either free or paid providers. You want to be able to put them in a tool that does data analytics, can use that information about where and registry stuff and names, and email locations, and URLs, and IP address ranges, and let you know when you're seeing this stuff. And if the tool can adapt or respond to it, turn off those firewall ports to those IP address ranges, etc. So remember, the good thing is attacks do a bunch of stuff. You can see it, you can react to it, different ways to tell the story of what's going on. It's not all doom and gloom, but with analytics you can start automating the response to this stuff. You're not always in a reactive state where you're moving from fire to fire. You can start getting proactive. You can start watching for some of these examples that I just put in front of you. So last slide of the day is the summary. Situation is critical. Situational awareness. Know what's going on in your network. Otherwise, as you all indicated, you don't know what's going on in your network. Who knows? There's lots of data that is available today on your network to do this. You can detect different sort of scenarios. These are just 4 things. There's a whole bunch of different things you can look for. You need a tool to do it. You need people to do it. You need the processes to do it. Using threat intelligence, use the power of the community. Don't try and do it, invent the wheel yourself. It's hard. Thank you. Any questions? We've got, I think we even have gifts for good questions. He gets one, so.
So good gifts.
Good gifts. Yes.
So
he's doubling down.
I might as well throw in another one. So with Stream, I wanted to say first, how often are you seeing that deployed? But that's not really the way to phrase this question, because it would take quite an infrastructure and a tap probably to get all that data, and Stream would be really useful. I guess I'll have to look at the write-ups, but are you seeing people who use that commonly? And is it I could see getting a lot of use out of it if I could talk management.
Yeah,
providing the infrastructure.
Percentage-wise, I don't know what the adoption is. It's a free add-on to Splunk, so we don't charge any money for it. Do you guys know? I don't know what the sort of adoption of Stream is. I'm guessing it's not terribly high.
It would be so much data.
Well, it's just the metadata, so you're not worried about the payload, which is the big chunk of it. And there's plenty of, you can say just HTTP. Right? You can do plenty of sort of narrow the focus, sort of, but yeah, it could be a torrent of data if that's what you wanted.
Oh, it looks very interesting. That's it.
Yes, yes. I'll take the guy in the back.
While your software is spelunking the network, is it recording? Is it giving me, the IT guy, the information of weak areas, weak routes, weak appliances on my network?
What do you mean by weak?
Things that need to be patched, things that need to be looked at for vulnerabilities.
So, I mean, the answer is yes. And there's do it yourself. Splunk is great because you can go and do all this stuff yourself with a core platform. You can also leverage premium solutions that sit on top of Splunk, which are basically you're substituting the hours you want to put into crafting what you want to accomplish for folks already doing that stuff for you. So, for example, we have our SIM product, Enterprise Security, which sits on top of Splunk, which will do exactly what and that's sort of looking at the security use case and asking exactly the questions that you just brought up. So yes, there's automated stuff to do it if that's the route you want to go, but you can also do it yourself with Splunk. So if you've got the data, you can ask the question.
Can you explain how we could take it a step further and automatically alert a NOC or a SOC based on a given result from an automated?
Yeah. Oh, so I mean, let me know if I answered the question far enough. So I showed some, for example, searches, which get us down to a table.
Yeah.
Any search in Splunk can be turned into an alert. Just give it a condition. If I see more than 0 of these things that look like the DNS exfiltration, generate an alert. Alerts can be whatever the case, whatever you want them to be. They could be simple emails. They could be put a ticket in your ticketing system. They could be do some remediation, reboot servers, turn off servers, whatever the case may be. But yeah, any search can be turned into an alert.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you demonstrated some mechanisms for detecting events on the network. Is there any integration or out of the box, I guess, with parts of your network infrastructure, so that if you detect exfiltration, for example, you could talk to the firewall?
Right. So two answers to this, and you're just teeing it up here for me. You can do sort of alerting sort of functionality where instead of sending an email, you call an API to do something. That's sort of your out-of-the-box core functionality to do that. The SIM product, which I mentioned, Enterprise Security, which sits on top of this and just does correlation searches, does what a SIM does. They actually just last year, but this week is the week of .conf for Splunk.com. So we're having a user conference right now. We just announced version 2 of our adaptive response framework. So this is a community of vendors that are coming together to actually use Splunk as the nerve center and allow you to have two-way, stuff that's going on my firewalls from my Cisco devices affects what happens maybe, for example, on my Windows host through Carbon Black, whatever, a framework for the interoperability between these vendors for exactly what you're talking about. So that is in our Enterprise Security product, which is on top of core Splunk.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So your SIM device sits on top of a platform that does what? What is that bottom platform exactly?
So core Splunk is the data ingestion, bringing the data in from your different devices. It's sort of, if I hop back to way back, So Splunk is the black part there, those black bars that are on the right. So it's the bringing the data in, it's the giving you a search interface, it's the collection of free apps that sit on top of it. And what an app is it's a collection of knowledge information about a domain, so useful searches, useful dashboards, useful reports, useful alerts packaged up, and you just download them on top of your Splunk instance. And you can click on the Splunk app in your Splunk instance and say, I now want to look at my Cisco infrastructure. And Cisco has generated the reports and dashboards that Cisco users want to know about what's going on in their. So and there's literally over 1,000 of these apps written by the community, written by vendors to do that stuff. So you can go and do a search by keyword and learn SPL and slice and dice like I've showed you. And you can use dashboards, which the work's already been done for you. These apps where people have written those searches for you. And you can also download premium apps that do SIM-like functionality. So it's what Splunk core is the platform. It's the ability to bring in data, start querying it, and allow you to use apps to start asking questions, specific questions about what's going on in your network in different domains, different types of questions. It's that putting it all together so that you have sort of a data fabric, allow you to bring in data and start working it, start asking it questions. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
The common perceptions out there that I see and hear, and actually I kind of have myself, with regard to Splunk is it's probably the premier product in the market with handling big data, but requires a lot of man hours and is very expensive.
Okay.
And for a small security department like most public agencies are going to have, that's a very limiting factor for us.
So it really depends on scale. So I'm just going to sort of talk what I've seen. A lot of folks, shops, are smaller, and they want to do tons of stuff. They want one-click security, does everything for them. That's really hard to do. I mentioned you've got to have the people, you got to have the process. So as any tool, it's going to require some administration. But you can start downloading Splunk on your laptop today for free, play with it. I was a former customer, so I was ingesting about 200 gigs of data a day. My firewalls, my domain controllers, my critical servers. I was the only administrator for Splunk, and it was probably 50% of my time. So, I mean, that's sort of giving you a scale around how much work it is to be successful. And I was actually using the SIM on top of it. Any tool is going to take people and process to do. It's true. But lots of folks try to do too much with too little. That's just what I've seen as both a customer and in my current role. Yeah, expense. Splunk costs money, yes. What folks typically don't include in sort of the return on investment with Splunk is that they use it for a single use case. They use it for a substitute for syslog. They use it for just monitoring what's going on with their firewall. What they don't typically calculate into sort of seeing the value of Splunk is the multiple use cases that you could do on Splunk once you've already paid for that data to be ingested. So you have a multitude of data sources flowing in. You've already paid for that. Now you can ask tons of different questions. You can ask, like I mentioned, the whole IT ops. What's going on? Capacity control. What's going on with security? What can I secure? You don't have to pay any more for that. All the additional use cases are free. Doing it for one case, it's expensive. Doing it for 10 use cases, it's now 1/10 the price. And potentially 9 other tools you don't have to buy or pay for. So it is software. It has a monetary value to it. What folks typically don't do is they don't look at what ROI can I get for this thing that I'm buying. They're buying the Cadillac, but they want to pay the Festiva price for it. You know.
So you're ingesting huge amounts of data, and one of the things I see from it is a value after the fact for those instances where you can learn of bad behavior a year or two down.
Yeah.
Being able to retrace those steps to clean up, evaluate, adjust your behavior is important. Is there a normal mechanism available through Splunk that allows you to perform good logical archiving, or how do you handle this year's worth of data, 2 years worth of data?
Okay, I'll try and give you sort of a quick frame. So when data comes into Splunk, it goes into what are called buckets. And the buckets are stored on disk. You're not setting up a database to do. It's stored right in the file system. And there are different temperatures of buckets. There's hot, warm buckets. Hot buckets are what it's being written to right now. Warm buckets are what I can search quickly. We've also got the notion of cold buckets. You can get the picture here. The idea being that if your warm buckets you might want to keep around for 30 days. They're the things I'm searching often. I want to know what's going on. I want to be able to get results quickly. Cold buckets, maybe it's the data that's a little older. I want to have access to it, but if I search it, it might take a little longer because I might want to put it on cheaper storage. You can also freeze data. Freeze data can be taken out of the ability to search, but you can always thaw it back in. So exactly. So some folks delete their frozen data. Some folks archive it to tape. But you can also today, if there's any shops here that use Hadoop, Hadoop is a nice, cheap storage infrastructure. You can actually store directly your data off into Hadoop, and you can actually search it still now live out of your Hadoop cluster. So there's the data retention stuff is all sort of part and parcel built into Splunk to allow you to manage. Maybe I want to put this stuff on faster storage, transition that to slower storage, cheaper storage, to maybe big data lake, and manage it all the way through that life cycle.
To add to that, we have customers here at the state and some of the local governments that range in storage retention from a year for some. That's all they're storing, up to 10 years. Now, obviously, not all 10 years of that is going to be in hot, warm, as Kevin's describing, right? But we have some that even have 3 years of data in hot, warm, because all of their most commonly performed searches go over a period of 3 years, right? So that's kind of how they rationalize that. A lot of the requirements are driven by the compliance standards you're subject to. So it might be IRS 1075, or in some cases HIPAA or MARS-E2. And whatever that combination is, the good news is, as Kevin was describing, you can kind of segment it, right, so that it makes the most sense for your environment.
And that's with the expensive Splunk, your storage footprint is probably your biggest expense. So if there's data that once you ingest it into Splunk, you want to move it to cheaper, you want to find ways to move it to cheaper storage. And you'll find once you start growing that it's not necessarily Splunk licensing, it's how you're using your storage.
It all depends on how much you want to store.
Yeah.
It costs money if you want to be able to search it, you've got to store it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.